My name is Amber. I am 27 years old and a successful forensic accountant. I walked out of my parents' house at 18 because they treated me like a ghost while they worshipped my golden boy brother. I built my own life far away from their toxic manipulation. But 9 years later, at exactly 10 o'clock at night, they pulled into my driveway uninvited. My father pounded his fists against my front door, shouting that it was time to come home and do my duty. I did not say a word. I just opened the door. But it was not just me standing there. A 75-year-old woman they had never met stepped out from the shadows of my hallway. She looked dead into my mother's eyes and called her by a name nobody had spoken aloud in 35 years. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to cut off toxic family members who only reach out when they want your money. The silence of my peaceful Tuesday night was suddenly shattered by the aggressive screeching of expensive tires tearing across my crushed stone driveway. My security cameras pinged my phone rapidly, but before I could even unlock the screen, the violent pounding started. My parents had somehow bypassed the electronic security gate at the main entrance of my property. I would later discover they had paid a shady private investigator a ridiculous sum of money just to acquire my personal access code. The heavy thuds against my solid oak front door literally shook the picture frames hanging on the hallway wall. "Open this door right now, Amber!" My father Richard bellowed at the top of his lungs. His voice carried that same arrogant, commanding authority that used to terrify me when I was just a little girl hiding in my bedroom. "You do not get to ignore your own flesh and blood when we need you. Get out here and do your duty." There was no polite knock. There was no text message asking how I had been doing for the last 9 years of my life. There was only immediate and blinding aggression. I unlocked the heavy deadbolt and stepped out onto the porch. The cool night air hit my face, but it was absolutely nothing compared to the icy glare of my father standing there with his chest puffed out like a dictator. My mother Brenda stood right behind his shoulder. Her arms were crossed tightly over her expensive cashmere sweater, and she glared at me as if I was a disobedient teenager who had missed curfew. Richard did not even bother to say hello or ask how I was doing. He marched right past the wooden porch steps and slammed a thick, heavy stack of legal documents directly onto the hood of my parked car. "Sign these right now," he ordered, tapping a thick gold pen aggressively against the top page. I walked down the steps and glanced down at the highlighted papers. They were mortgage documents. Specifically, it was an application for an $800,000 home equity line of credit, secured directly against my house. I looked back at my father, waiting for the punchline of this bad joke, but his face was dead serious. "Cameron is going through a minor rough patch with his tech startup," Richard declared, waving his hand dismissively, as if a massive financial collapse was just a tiny, everyday inconvenience. "He needs an immediate cash injection to keep his servers running and to satisfy his greedy venture capitalists. You own this property free and clear. I checked the county public records myself. You are going to sign this house over as collateral tonight so your brother can get the commercial loan he needs to survive." My mother stepped forward, then her face contorting into a familiar mask of fake disappointment. "You walked out on us 9 years ago, Amber." She scolded, her voice dripping with absolute venom. "You never sent a single dollar back home to help this family. You never even called to check on our health. Now it is time to pay us back for raising you and putting food on your plate. Cameron is our only son. He is the legacy of this entire family name. If his business goes under, we will be completely humiliated in our wealthy social circle. You have a good, stable job counting other people's money all day. You do not need a house this big all to yourself. Sign the papers so your brother can keep his company afloat." They were literally demanding I risk my entire life savings, my home and my spotless credit score to bail out the golden child who had never worked a hard, honest day in his entire life. Before I could even formulate a response to that sheer audacity, a fourth person stepped out of the luxury sport utility vehicle. It was Jasmine, my brother's wife. She was an elegant African-American woman who came from a very wealthy new money family, and she always made sure everyone around her knew it. She slammed the heavy car door and tottered over the loose gravel in towering red-bottom designer heels. "This driveway is absolutely pathetic," Amber Jasmine complained loudly. She did not even bother looking at my face as she stared down in disgust at the dust gathering on her expensive shoes. Why do you live out here in the middle of nowhere anyway? It smells like wet dirt and complete desperation. Could you just sign whatever Richard wants so we can leave this awful place? Cameron and I have a first-class flight to Aspen, booked for tomorrow morning for a luxury ski trip, and I still need to pack my winter designer wardrobe. She crossed her arms, rolling her dark eyes at my comfortable sweatpants and oversized home sweater. Jasmine was completely oblivious to reality. She stood there belittling my lifestyle, complaining about her shoes and bragging about an expensive vacation, while her husband hovered in the background, silently sweating through his designer dress shirt. Jasmine had absolutely no idea that Cameron's startup was bankrupt. She had no clue the $800,000 was not for servers. She did not know her perfect wealthy lifestyle was a fragile house of cards ready to collapse. My mother saw my calm silence and quickly decided it was the perfect moment to twist the emotional knife. She stepped off the gravel and onto the first porch step, crossing her arms tightly to ward off the night chill. "You are so incredibly selfish and ungrateful, Amber." Brenda sneered, her voice trembling with that trademark theatrical disappointment she had perfected over decades. "Do you have any idea what your father and I sacrificed to give you a decent life? We paid for your braces. We put clothes on your back when you were completely ungrateful. You think just because you ran away at 18 and got a fancy degree, you are suddenly better than us. Look at your brother. He stayed. He respected the family structure. He built a company from the ground up, while you abandoned us to go count pennies in a corporate basement. You owe us this beautiful, expensive house. You owe Cameron your complete support. Families stick together when times are tough, and the fact that you are even hesitating to sign those papers shows exactly how heartless you really are. We protected you from the harsh real world. We kept a roof over your head. You would be absolutely nothing without the foundation we provided. If you refuse to help your own flesh and blood tonight, you are dead to me. You will be completely cut off from the only people who ever truly loved you. You are a cold, ungrateful daughter, and it is finally time you start acting like a part of this family and pull your own weight for once in your miserable life. Just sign the damn line of credit application, and we will leave you alone to rot in this pathetic house." I stood there on the porch and let her toxic words wash right over me. 9 years ago, a speech like that would have sent me running to my bedroom in tears, desperately trying to figure out how to earn their love. But I was not a terrified teenager anymore. I was a professional investigator who spent 40 hours a week dismantling corporate frauds and exposing financial liars. I knew exactly what my mother was doing. It was textbook emotional manipulation designed to panic me into making a massive financial mistake. I did not cry. I did not raise my voice to defend myself. I did not even bother to explain that I bought this house entirely on my own or that Cameron was a fraud. Instead, I slowly reached into the deep pocket of my sweatpants and pulled out a heavy silver Zippo lighter. It was a vintage piece I had picked up at an antique store years ago. I flipped the metal lid open with a sharp metallic clink that echoed loudly in the quiet night air. I calmly picked up the thick stack of mortgage documents my father had slammed onto my car hood. I held the crisp white pages up so they could all see exactly what I was doing. Then I struck the flint. A bright orange flame flickered to life, casting a warm glow across my driveway. I touched the flame directly to the bottom corner of the loan application. The thick legal paper caught fire instantly. The edges curled and blackened as the fire quickly consumed the lines demanding my signature. I held the burning stack for a few seconds, letting the flames grow higher, before I casually dropped the flaming papers onto the concrete driveway, right at my father's expensive leather shoes. My father let out an animalistic roar of absolute rage. "Are you completely out of your mind?" he screamed frantically, stomping his heavy feet to put out the fire before it could scorch the paint on my car. He lunged forward suddenly, grabbing the thick fabric of my sweater with both of his heavy hands. "I am going to absolutely destroy you, Amber. Do you hear me? I will call the National Board of Accountancy tomorrow morning. I will tell them you are mentally unstable and violently attacked your own family. I will have your forensic accounting license permanently revoked before lunch. You think you are so smart with your fancy investigative job exposing white-collar crimes. I will make sure you never work in the financial sector ever again. You will be scrubbing floors for minimum wage by the time I am done ruining your entire professional reputation." His face was inches from mine, his skin bright red and the veins popping out of his thick neck. Jasmine shrieked loudly in the background, demanding he let go of me, but he just tightened his aggressive grip, shaking me violently back and forth on the steps. I did not even flinch. I just stared blankly into his furious eyes, waiting for the inevitable interruption I knew was coming. Behind me, the heavy brass doorknob of my front door clicked sharply. The solid wooden door swung open wide, spilling warm yellow light out onto the dark porch. My father froze. His aggressive grip on my sweater loosened instantly as he stared over my shoulder in complete shock. Brenda gasped loudly, taking a sudden step backward until her back hit the side of the luxury sport utility vehicle. An older woman stepped out from the shadows of my hallway and walked slowly to the edge of the porch. She was exactly 75 years old, with elegant silver hair and a posture as straight as an arrow. She wore a tailored charcoal blazer and rested her hands lightly on a polished wooden cane. She ignored my father completely. She ignored Cameron, who was staring with his mouth hanging wide open. Her sharp, piercing eyes locked directly onto my mother, who was now shaking uncontrollably by the car. The older woman smiled a thin, chilling smile that held zero warmth. "Long time no see, Roxanne," she said, her voice cutting through the silent night air like a razor-sharp knife. The name hit my mother with the physical force of a massive freight train. The arrogant sneer that had been permanently plastered across her face for my entire life instantly vanished without a trace. All the color drained rapidly from her perfectly made-up cheeks, leaving her skin an unhealthy pale ash gray. She let out a sharp, strangled gasp that sounded exactly like she was choking on the cold night air. Her manicured hands flew up to cover her mouth, and her knees literally buckled beneath her weight. She slid down the glossy side door of my father's expensive sport utility vehicle, leaving greasy handprints on the spotless black paint until she hit the crushed gravel driveway. She sat there in the dirt, hyperventilating wildly, her chest heaving up and down as she stared at the older woman in absolute unfiltered terror. Cameron blinked in complete confusion. He looked from the elegant old woman standing on the porch down to our mother, who was trembling violently on the ground. "Who is Roxanne?" he asked, his voice cracking slightly in the quiet night. He took a hesitant step toward Brenda, but Jasmine quickly grabbed his arm, pulling him back. Jasmine was staring at the entire scene with narrowed, highly suspicious eyes. Her rich family had dealt with plenty of corporate vultures and hidden scandals, and she could instantly recognize the raw, unadulterated panic radiating from her mother-in-law. "You told me your mother was an orphan from Seattle." Jasmine snapped at Cameron, her tone demanding immediate answers. Why is this total stranger calling her by a different name, and why is she having a severe panic attack on a dirt driveway? Cameron just shook his head repeatedly, totally lost. He had grown up believing the flawless narrative our parents had spoon-fed us his entire life. The golden boy had absolutely no idea he was currently standing on decades of toxic criminal lies. My father was not a man who handled confusion or a sudden loss of control very well. Seeing his wife collapsed on the dirty ground and his wealthy daughter-in-law asking very dangerous questions completely short-circuited his brain. He let go of my sweater completely and turned his massive, heavy frame toward the wooden porch. He puffed out his chest and marched aggressively up the wooden stairs, closing the distance between himself and the elderly woman. "Listen to me, you crazy old bat," Richard snarled, pointing his thick, heavy finger directly at her face. "I do not know what kind of sick extortion scam you and my ungrateful daughter are trying to pull here tonight, but it is not going to work. My wife Brenda is an orphan. She grew up with absolutely nothing and has no living relatives anywhere in this country. You have the wrong house and the wrong family." He was practically spitting as he shouted, trying to use his sheer physical size to intimidate her into backing down. But Beatrice did not even blink once. She stood perfectly still, resting her weight elegantly on her polished wooden cane, looking up at him with an expression of pure, icy amusement. "You are trespassing on private property and harassing my wife." Richard continued, his voice echoing loudly across the quiet suburban neighborhood. I am giving you exactly 5 seconds to turn around and walk back out of that door before I dial 911 and have the local police drag you out of here in handcuffs. I am a highly respected businessman in this state. I know the chief of police personally. I will press maximum charges for trespassing, harassment, and attempted extortion, and I will make sure you spend the rest of your miserable life rotting in a dirty jail cell. Now get off this porch right now. He reached into his tailored suit jacket and pulled out his expensive smartphone, aggressively waving it in her face to prove he was completely serious about making the call. Beatrice did not flinch or back away from the phone. Instead, she leaned forward slightly, her silver hair catching the warm porch light, and offered him a devastatingly calm and confident smile. "Please call them Richard," she replied, her voice smooth and completely unafraid. "In fact, I would highly prefer it if you called the police right now. It will save us the absolute trouble of driving down to the Federal Bureau of Investigation field office in the morning. I am sure the authorities would be absolutely fascinated to hear all about a poor orphan named Brenda, who mysteriously materialized out of thin air 35 years ago with a massive untraceable trust fund." My father froze, his thumb hovering nervously over the bright screen of his phone. The absolute certainty in her steady voice made him hesitate. That brief hesitation was all I needed to take complete control of the situation. I stepped between my father and Beatrice, crossing my arms firmly over my chest. "If you want to scream and make a public spectacle out of yourselves, you can do it inside my house," I ordered, my voice cold and authoritative. "The neighbors are already turning their porch lights on, and I am sure Jasmine does not want her prestigious family name dragged through a public neighborhood screaming match. Get up off the ground and get inside now." Richard opened his mouth to argue, but the sound of heavy boots crunching on the gravel stopped him dead in his tracks. Two massive men dressed in sharp black suits stepped out from the dark shadows near the side of my house. They were Beatrice's private security team, and they quietly positioned themselves directly behind my parents' luxury vehicle, perfectly blocking the only exit out of the long driveway. They did not say a single word. They just stood there with their hands folded neatly in front of them, staring blankly at my father. The trap had officially been sprung. There was no running away from the truth tonight. My father looked at the giant security guards, then down at his trembling wife, and finally realized he had lost complete control of the board. Defeated and furious, he reached down and yanked my mother to her feet, aggressively pushing her toward my open front door. We walked down the long hallway of my home, and I directed everyone into my main office. It was an impeccably organized space with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, a massive mahogany desk, and a large flat-screen monitor mounted on the wall. I practically lived in this room, dissecting complex financial frauds for my corporate clients, so it felt incredibly fitting that my family was about to face their own ultimate judgment right here. My father practically shoved my mother onto the leather sofa, while Cameron hovered nervously near the doorway. Jasmine immediately tried to assert her usual dominance to overcompensate for how visibly rattled she was. She dropped her expensive designer bag onto my pristine desk and crossed her arms tightly over her chest. "I am absolutely not sitting on that cheap leather sofa," she announced, tossing her dark hair over her shoulder. "And since we are being held hostage in this tiny room by a gang of hired thugs, the absolute least you could do is offer me a proper drink, Amber. I want a glass of sparkling water with lemon, and make sure it is ice cold. The blatant disrespect your family is showing me tonight is completely unacceptable. We flew all the way out here to help your pathetic brother, and now we are being interrogated by some random elderly woman in a suburban home office. I demand someone tell me exactly what is going on right now before I call my father's corporate legal team and have everyone in this room sued for false imprisonment." She glared at me, tapping her red bottom heel against the hardwood floor, waiting for me to play the role of the obedient hostess. I did not even look at her. I completely ignored her ridiculous demands. I walked calmly around my heavy mahogany desk and took my seat in my high-back leather executive chair. Beatrice took the seat opposite the desk, resting her hands gracefully on her polished wooden cane, quietly watching my parents squirm on the sofa. My mother was still shaking uncontrollably, her eyes darting toward the heavy office door, where the two massive security guards now stood silently blocking the only exit. "You are making a massive mistake, Amber," my father growled, pointing his thick, heavy finger at me from across the room. "You have absolutely no right to hold us here and subject your mother to this ridiculous psychological torture." I reached down to the floor beside my desk and hauled up a heavy black fireproof briefcase. The dull metallic thud it made when I placed it on the desk made my mother flinch violently, as if I had just fired a gun. I punched in the numeric access code and popped the heavy steel latches open. The sharp mechanical click echoed loudly in the tense, silent room. I did not raise my voice or acknowledge my father's aggressive physical threats. Instead, I reached inside the secure fireproof case and pulled out a thick stack of yellowed certified legal documents dating all the way back to 1989. The paper was old and slightly brittle at the edges, but the official government seals stamped firmly on the front pages were perfectly intact and undeniably authentic. "These are certified legal copies, obtained directly from the Federal Archives," I said softly, sliding my fingers over the faded ink. "They tell a very interesting story about a woman who claimed she was an orphan." I picked up a small remote from my desk and pressed a silver button. The large flat screen monitor mounted on the wall directly behind me flickered to life, illuminating the dark room. I projected a high-resolution scan of a 35-year-old federal tax return directly onto the bright screen. The name at the very top of the official document was clearly printed as Beatrice Hayes. Directly below it, listed in the section for legal dependents, was the name of her younger sister, Roxanne Hayes. Cameron squinted at the massive screen, his deep confusion quickly turning into genuine shock. "Roxanne," he whispered, reading the typed name aloud. I nodded firmly, looking right at him. "Yes, Cameron. Roxanne. The wealthy woman sitting next to you on that sofa is not an orphan named Brenda. Her real name is Roxanne Hayes. 35 years ago, Beatrice and Roxanne inherited a family estate worth exactly $1.5 million. Beatrice placed the funds into a joint trust account, intending to use the money to start a legitimate commercial real estate business for both of them. But your mother did not want to work hard or share the wealth." I clicked my computer mouse and a new document appeared on the wall monitor. It was a certified police report paired with a copy of a federal indictment. I looked directly at my mother, whose face was now buried deep in her trembling hands. Roxanne systematically drained the entire $1.5 million trust fund. Over the course of 3 months, I explained, my voice clinical and completely devoid of sympathy. When Beatrice discovered the missing funds and confronted her, Roxanne panicked. To successfully cover her tracks, she planted a massive quantity of illegal narcotics in the trunk of Beatrice's car and anonymously called the police. She framed her own flesh and blood for a severe felony to ensure Beatrice could never testify against her in a financial dispute. She took the stolen money, legally changed her name to Brenda, and completely vanished to start a wealthy life with Richard. Meanwhile, her own sister was convicted on fabricated evidence and sentenced to spend 5 agonizing years rotting away in a maximum security federal prison. The room went completely dead silent. The only sound was the low humming of the monitor displaying the undeniable proof of my mother's devastating criminal past. Cameron broke the heavy silence with a loud, arrogant scoff. He stepped away from the doorway and walked right up to the front of my mahogany desk, crossing his arms over his expensive designer suit. "You really think you did something here, Amber?" he sneered, shaking his head in absolute disbelief. "You dragged us all the way inside this house and hired fake security guards just to play an episode of Cold Case Files. So what if our mother took the money 35 years ago? I am actually glad she did. It paid for a great life, and she clearly put it to much better use than this bitter old woman ever would have. But more importantly, you are supposedly this brilliant corporate forensic accountant, and you completely forgot how the actual law works. There is a little thing called the statute of limitations. You cannot prosecute a financial crime from the 1980s. The time limit to press criminal charges expired before I was even born. You have absolutely nothing. You cannot touch her, and you cannot touch this family. We are completely legally untouchable." He looked back at Jasmine, expecting his wealthy wife to nod in agreement, but she was staring at the wall monitor with cold, calculating eyes. Cameron turned his arrogant smirk back to me, leaning his hands flat on my desk. Now turn off that ridiculous screen, tell your muscle to move out of the driveway, and sign the home equity loan papers before I decide to sue you for emotional distress and false imprisonment. You thought you had a winning hand tonight, but you played your only card, and it is completely worthless. Go ahead and call the police if you want. They will just laugh in your face and arrest you for wasting their time. Our family built a legacy while you sat around hoarding old tax returns. I looked at my brother and let a slow, genuine smile spread across my face. You are absolutely right, Cameron, I replied, keeping my voice completely even and calm. The statute of limitations on the original trust fund theft expired decades ago. Beatrice and I are fully aware that the federal government cannot prosecute your mother for what she did in 1989. We did not pull those files to put her in prison tonight. We pulled them to prove to Jasmine exactly what kind of fraudulent genetic material you inherited. Jasmine flinched at my words, her posture stiffening immediately on the leather sofa. Cameron let out a nervous laugh, taking a small step back from my desk. What the hell is that supposed to mean? He stammered, his arrogant facade cracking just a fraction. I reached down into the heavy fireproof briefcase one more time. I pulled out a thick red binder completely filled with heavily tabbed spreadsheets and banking records. I dropped it onto the desk right in front of him. This is the fully audited financial log for your tech startup, I announced clearly. You claimed you needed an $800,000 line of credit tonight because the commercial tech market took a sudden downturn. You told Jasmine and our parents that your servers required a massive cash injection to keep the venture capitalists happy. I opened the red binder and pressed the silver button on my remote. The 35-year-old tax return vanished from the wall monitor and was instantly replaced by a massive digital spreadsheet highlighting dozens of offshore bank transfers. The problem, Cameron, is that your company is not failing because of the market. Your company is failing because you are a pathological liar and a common thief. I stood up from my leather executive chair and walked around the desk, so there was absolutely nothing standing between my brother and the undeniable truth. Let us dissect your actual corporate accounts, I said loudly so everyone in the room could hear every single damning word. Over the last 14 months, you completely embezzled $1.2 million from your own startup. You disguised the massive withdrawals as independent contractor fees and offshore server maintenance costs. But those dummy shell companies were not hosting software data. They were funneling venture capital money directly into high-roller casino accounts at the Bellagio and the MGM Grand in Las Vegas. You have a severe, untreated gambling addiction, Cameron. The spreadsheet on the wall automatically scrolled down, highlighting massive negative balances and extreme casino credit lines. But gambling was not your only expensive hobby. I continued, my voice echoing in the quiet office. Jasmine sat up perfectly straight, her dark eyes locked intensely on the glowing monitor. A man who steals millions of dollars usually likes to spend it on company. You have been actively financing 3 separate mistresses for the past 2 years. You pay for a luxury penthouse apartment in downtown Chicago for a 22-year-old fitness model. You bought a brand new Mercedes-Benz for a cocktail waitress in Miami. And you are fully funding the graduate school tuition of your former executive assistant, who suddenly quit your company last spring. Every single wire transfer, every signed lease agreement, and every fraudulent bank statement is perfectly documented inside this red binder. You do not need my house to save your tech company. Your company is already dead, and the Federal Securities and Exchange Commission is already investigating the missing venture capital funds. You just needed $800,000 in clean cash to pay off your violent casino bookies before they come looking for you and your wealthy wife. Cameron stared blindly at the massive spreadsheet, his mouth opening and closing like a suffocated fish. The golden boy illusion he had carefully maintained for his entire life was completely annihilated in under 3 minutes. He looked absolutely pathetic, standing there covered in cold sweat, as the crushing weight of his massive financial crimes finally caught up with him. Jasmine let out a sharp, high-pitched laugh that shattered the heavy silence in the room. She stood up from the leather sofa, shaking her head and waving her manicured hand dismissively toward the wall monitor. "You are honestly pathetic, Amber," she scoffed, her voice dripping with absolute condescension. Do you really expect me to believe any of this garbage? You probably spent your entire weekend typing up these fake spreadsheets just to ruin our evening. You have always been insanely jealous of Cameron and his success. He built a tech empire while you sit alone in this boring suburban house playing detective. There is absolutely no way my husband is broke, and there is definitely no way he is cheating on me. We just booked a first-class ski trip to Aspen yesterday. Broke men do not book luxury suites at five-star ski resorts. You are just a bitter, lonely woman trying to drag him down to your miserable level because you cannot stand the fact that he is the favorite child. She walked over to Cameron and possessively linked her arm through his, glaring at me as if I was a pathetic insect. Tell her, Cameron, Jasmine demanded, giving his arm a confident squeeze. Tell your crazy sister to turn off her little slideshow so we can go home. But Cameron did not say a single word. He just stood there, frozen, staring blankly at the floor. I did not waste my breath arguing with her delusional accusations. Instead, I calmly reached into the very bottom of my fireproof briefcase and pulled out a thick black manila folder. I did not toss it onto the desk. I walked directly over to Jasmine and pressed the heavy folder firmly against her chest, forcing her to let go of Cameron's arm to catch it. I do not care if you believe my spreadsheets, Jasmine, I said, looking directly into her furious dark eyes. But I know you will believe your own personal bank statements. Jasmine ripped the folder open aggressively, ready to tear the papers apart and throw them right in my face. But the second her eyes landed on the top page, all the aggressive color instantly drained from her beautiful face. The very first document was a high-definition 8x10 glossy photograph taken by a licensed private investigator. It clearly showed Cameron kissing a blonde woman outside a luxury apartment building in Chicago. The timestamp in the bottom corner was from last Tuesday when Cameron had claimed he was working late at a venture capital networking event. Jasmine flipped to the next page, her hands beginning to tremble slightly. It was another crystal-clear photograph this time, showing Cameron handing the keys to a brand-new Mercedes-Benz to a young cocktail waitress in Miami. But the photographs were not the absolute worst part. Underneath the glossy pictures was a thick stack of official banking records. These were not from Cameron's corporate tech accounts. These were certified copies of Jasmine and Cameron's joint marital checking account. I watched her perfectly manicured fingernails trace the highlighted lines of the bank statements. Over the past 6 months, Cameron had systematically transferred over $200,000 directly out of their joint savings. He used the money from Jasmine's wealthy family to pay for his mistress's luxury rent designer handbags and tuition. He even used their joint credit cards to buy the expensive diamond necklace he gave his former executive assistant for her birthday. It was the exact same diamond necklace he told Jasmine was too expensive when she had asked for it for their wedding anniversary. The betrayal was meticulously documented line by agonizing line. Every time he claimed he was on a business trip to secure more funding for his startup, he was actually draining Jasmine's personal trust fund distributions to play high-roller blackjack in Vegas. The paper trail was absolutely undeniable. It had official bank letterheads, routing numbers, and Cameron's authorized digital signature on every single fraudulent transaction. He had not just embezzled from his fake tech company, he had actively stolen from his own wife to finance his secret double life. The heavy silence in the office was deafening as Jasmine stood there slowly turning the pages. The transition from absolute denial to horrifying realization played out across her face in real time. Her breathing became incredibly shallow and erratic. Her dark eyes darted back and forth across the bank statements, absorbing the devastating reality that her entire perfect marriage was nothing but a calculated financial scam. She was not married to a brilliant tech chief executive officer. She was legally bound to a broke, desperate fraud who had drained her personal savings to sleep with other women. The deep internal rage boiling inside her was almost palpable. You could practically see the prestigious, wealthy foundation she had built her entire identity upon crumbling into absolute dust. She had spent years looking down on people like me, flaunting her designer clothes and bragging about her elite social status, completely unaware that her husband was secretly destroying everything behind her back. Her hands gripped the edges of the black folder so tightly her knuckles turned completely white. She did not scream or cry. The sheer magnitude of the betrayal completely bypassed sadness and went straight into pure, unadulterated fury. The illusion of her perfect wealthy life was shattered permanently, and she realized she was financially tied to a sinking ship. Cameron finally snapped out of his paralyzed state and reached out a trembling hand toward her shoulder. "Jasmine, please," he whispered, his voice cracking pitifully in the quiet room. "I can explain everything. It is not what it looks like." That was the absolute worst thing he possibly could have said. Jasmine did not hesitate. The second the pathetic excuse left his mouth, she swung her right arm back and delivered a staggering, open-handed slap directly across his face. The sharp crack of skin against skin echoed like a gunshot in the confined space of my home office. The sheer physical force of the blow caught Cameron completely off guard. He stumbled backward, his expensive leather shoes slipping awkwardly on the polished hardwood floor, until his shoulder slammed violently into my heavy mahogany bookshelf. A dozen thick financial textbooks tumbled off the shelves and crashed onto the floor around his feet, but nobody even blinked at the mess. The force of the impact left a bright red handprint perfectly outlined on his pale skin. Cameron clutched his rapidly reddening cheek, gasping in absolute shock. He had never been hit a single day in his perfectly coddled life. He looked up at Jasmine with wide, terrified eyes, expecting her to apologize or break down crying, but she just stood there towering over him with her chest heaving. The elegant, sophisticated woman who had walked into my house complaining about the dirt on her designer shoes was completely gone. In her place was a furious, betrayed wife who had just realized her entire reality was a carefully constructed lie. Total chaos instantly erupted in the room. Brenda let out a piercing shriek from the leather sofa. She scrambled to her feet, completely abandoning her own terrifying legal problems to rush over and protect her precious golden boy. "Do not you ever lay a hand on my son, you crazy woman!" Brenda screamed, positioning her body between Cameron and Jasmine. "He made a mistake, but he is still your husband, and you owe him absolute respect." Jasmine slowly turned her dark, furious gaze away from Cameron and locked it directly onto my mother. The sheer intensity of her glare made Brenda instinctively take a step backward. "Respect." Jasmine repeated, her voice dropping to a dangerously low and quiet register. "You have the absolute audacity to stand there and demand respect after what you did." Jasmine took a menacing step forward, forcing Brenda to retreat until her back hit the solid wood of the bookshelf. "Do you really think I am completely stupid, Brenda? Do you think I do not know exactly what you have been doing behind my back for the last 6 months?" Jasmine pointed a shaking, manicured finger right in my mother's face. "You called me crying every single week, begging me to ask my wealthy father for an emergency loan. You told me Cameron just needed a little financial help to bridge a tiny gap in his tech business before the new fiscal quarter started. You swore to me on your life that he was working late nights at the office, trying to build a beautiful, secure future for our family. You knew he was broke. You knew his company was a massive failure. Did you know about the mistresses too, Brenda? Did you know he was spending my trust fund to buy diamond necklaces for 20-year-old girls in Miami, while you were actively begging me for cash?" Brenda opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. She looked frantically toward Richard for help, but my father was still staring at the wall monitor, completely paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of the financial destruction happening in front of him. "You are all completely disgusting," Jasmine shouted, her voice finally breaking with raw emotion. "You are a family of pathetic leeches sucking the life and the money out of anyone stupid enough to trust you. You lied to me about your background. You lied to me about your wealth. You lied to me about your own name." Jasmine gestured wildly toward Beatrice, who was still sitting calmly in her chair watching the entire civil war unfold with cold satisfaction. "You are not a wealthy, sophisticated matriarch, Brenda. You are a common criminal who stole from your own sister and then raised a son to be exactly like you. You enabled his disgusting behavior because you needed his fake tech company to validate your fake wealthy lifestyle. You are nothing but a massive fraud, and I am completely done paying for your delusions." Jasmine turned her back on my mother in absolute disgust and looked down at Cameron, who was still cowering near the fallen textbooks. She aggressively grabbed her left hand and yanked the massive 4-carat diamond engagement ring off her finger. The heavy platinum band scraped harshly against her knuckle, but she did not care. She ripped off her diamond wedding band right after it. She held the expensive jewelry in her palm for a split second before she violently threw both rings directly at Cameron's chest. The diamonds hit his designer dress shirt and bounced off, hitting the hardwood floor with a sharp metallic clatter that sounded incredibly final. "Keep the fake rings," Cameron Jasmine spat, glaring down at him with pure, unfiltered hatred. "You are going to need to sell them to pay for a decent criminal defense attorney, because the second I leave this house, I am calling my father's corporate legal team. I am filing for a vicious, highly publicized divorce at exactly 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. I am going to freeze every joint account and make sure federal investigators know exactly where you hid all that stolen money. My father's lawyers will strip you down to the absolute bone. You thought you could use me as your personal automatic teller machine to fund your pathetic double life. You picked the wrong woman to steal from. You and your entire fraudulent family deserve absolutely everything that is coming to you." Jasmine grabbed her expensive designer bag off my desk, practically vibrating with rage. She did not say goodbye to anyone. She turned around, her red bottom heels clicking sharply against the floor, and stormed out of my office, leaving the door wide open. We listened in dead silence as her heavy footsteps echoed down the hallway, followed by the violent slamming of my front door. My parents were absolutely not going to let their golden ticket escape that easily. The violent slamming of my front door finally snapped them out of their paralyzed state. Richard and Brenda sprinted out of my home office, practically tripping over Cameron, who was still curled up and weeping pathetically on the floor. They ran down the long hallway and yanked the heavy front door open again. I followed them slowly, stepping out onto the cold porch to watch the final collapse of their master plan. Jasmine was standing at the very end of my crushed stone driveway, furiously tapping on the bright screen of her smartphone to order a premium Uber. Brenda ran down the wooden porch steps, completely ignoring the dust and gravel ruining her expensive designer shoes. "Jasmine, please wait," Brenda begged, frantically lunging forward to grab her wealthy daughter-in-law's arm. "You cannot just walk away from this marriage right now. Cameron loves you so much. We all love you. You are a crucial part of this family." Richard stood heavily on the porch, breathing hard. "Do not be rash, Jasmine," he commanded, trying to sound like his usual authoritative self, but his voice was trembling with pure, undeniable panic. "This is just a temporary financial misunderstanding. Cameron made some very poor investments with the wrong crowd, but we can fix this immediately. I promise you every single penny of your trust fund will be replaced by tomorrow morning." Jasmine aggressively ripped her arm out of my mother's desperate grasp. "How exactly do you plan to do that, Richard?" she demanded, her voice cutting through the night air. "Your golden boy son is completely bankrupt, and according to Amber's verified documents, you are practically destitute yourself. You do not have $200,000 to pay me back." Brenda pointed a shaking, manicured finger right back at me, standing quietly on the porch. "Amber is going to pay you back," Brenda yelled with absolute manic desperation. "She owns this massive suburban house free and clear. She has hundreds of thousands of dollars in equity. We will make her sell it. We will force her to liquidate all of her retirement accounts. She will sign the deed over to you tonight. We will give you absolutely everything she has. Just please do not call your father's corporate lawyers. Do not leave my son." Richard nodded vigorously, aggressively backing up his wife's completely insane promise. "She is right, Jasmine. Amber owes us for raising her. She will take out the maximum line of credit and transfer the funds directly to your account. You will get all your money back, and Cameron can go to rehab for his gambling addiction. Just come back inside the house, and we will make Amber sign the papers right now." Jasmine looked from my desperate, sweating parents back to me, and then let out a cold, unforgiving laugh that sent shivers down my spine. "You are both completely out of your minds," Jasmine stated clearly, her voice echoing across the quiet residential street. "You really think I want the equity from your estranged daughter's house? I do not want her money. I want to see your fraudulent son completely destroyed in a court of law." Jasmine took a menacing step toward Brenda, looking down at her mother-in-law with absolute, unfiltered disgust. "My family is worth hundreds of millions of dollars, Brenda. We do not need your pathetic suburban restitution. My father employs an entire team of the most ruthless corporate litigators in this state. They do not just sue people to get our money back. They sue people to send a devastating permanent message. By the time my lawyers are finished auditing your entire family history, there will be absolutely nothing left of your fake legacy. She turned her furious gaze to Richard, who was now sweating profusely under the porch light. You thought you were so incredibly clever marrying your useless son into my prestigious family to secure your own financial future? You thought we were just a giant bank you could secretly withdraw from whenever Cameron needed to play high roller in Vegas or buy jewelry for his mistresses. But you made a fatal miscalculation. You left a massive paper trail and you underestimated my intelligence. A sleek black car pulled up to the curb at the end of the driveway, its headlights sweeping across the dark lawn. The premium Uber had arrived. Jasmine opened the heavy car door, but paused to deliver her final, devastating blow. I am going to make sure the federal investigators see every single spreadsheet Amber just showed me. I'm going to make sure your elite country club friends know exactly how you funded your pathetic lifestyle. Enjoy your prison sentence, Brenda. Jasmine climbed gracefully into the back seat and slammed the heavy car door shut. The vehicle instantly sped away down the dark street, leaving my parents standing completely alone in the cold night air. Inside my house, we could hear Cameron still sobbing loudly on the office floor, crying over his ruined marriage and his permanently shattered future. The bright red taillights of the Uber disappeared around the corner, plunging the driveway back into darkness. The heavy silence that followed was completely suffocating. The massive financial safety net my parents had relied on for years was permanently gone. There was no wealthy daughter-in-law left to bail them out. There was no successful tech startup to hide behind anymore. There was only the cold, hard, terrifying reality of their massive crimes. Brenda and Richard slowly turned around to face me. They walked heavily back up the driveway, their expensive shoes crunching against the gravel. They looked absolutely exhausted, but that physical exhaustion quickly twisted into a dark, highly desperate rage. They had just lost absolutely everything in the span of 30 minutes, and they desperately needed someone to blame for their spectacular downfall. Richard stomped aggressively up the wooden porch stairs, his face contorted in pure, unadulterated hatred. He was no longer trying to intimidate me to get a loan. He was cornered like a wild, rabid animal, and he was ready to attack. "Look at what you just did," he snarled, stepping dangerously close to my face. "You just destroyed your brother's entire life." My father snarled, stepping dangerously close to my face, his fists clenched tightly at his sides. He was breathing heavily, his expensive suit jacket rumpled and stained with sweat. "You think you won tonight, Amber? You think you hold all the cards just because you found a few old tax returns and scared off a spoiled rich girl? You are absolutely delusional." Richard pointed his thick finger directly between my eyes, his face twisted in pure, unfiltered hatred. "I am going to make you pay for what you just did to this family. Tomorrow morning at exactly 8 o'clock, I am personally calling the National Association of State Boards of Accountancy. I know exactly who sits on the disciplinary committee. I am going to tell them that you are completely mentally unstable. I will tell them you suffered a severe psychotic break and maliciously attacked your own family with fabricated financial documents. I will hire my own forensic accountants to audit every single case you have ever worked on, and I will make sure they find enough discrepancies to have your professional license permanently revoked. You think Jasmine's family has ruthless corporate litigators? Just wait until you see what I can do to your pathetic little career. You will be blacklisted from every major financial firm in the country by noon. You will be bagging groceries for minimum wage, and I will make sure you lose this expensive suburban house you are so incredibly proud of." His voice was rising with every single word until he was practically screaming in my face, trying desperately to regain his authoritative control through sheer aggressive intimidation. My mother pushed past him, entirely dropping the pathetic weeping victim act she had been playing all night. Her eyes were hard and cold, completely devoid of any maternal affection. If she was going down, she was clearly going down fighting. "You want the truth? Amber?" Brenda screamed, her voice cracking with raw, malicious venom. "You want to know exactly what happened 35 years ago? Yes, I stole the $1.5 million. I took every single penny from that joint trust fund and I planted those drugs in Beatrice's car to send her to federal prison. And you know what? I am absolutely glad I did it. She pointed a shaking manicured finger directly at her older sister, who was still sitting calmly in the office. Beatrice was weak. She was a pathetic coward who wanted to play it safe and invest in boring commercial real estate. She did not have the vision or the ruthless drive to build a real legacy. I deserved that money. I used it to secure a wealthy, powerful husband and build a prominent social standing. I raised a son who had the ambition to start his own tech company, even if it did not work out perfectly. I did what I had to do to survive in the real world. You are exactly like her, Amber. You are weak and pathetic, hiding behind your spreadsheets and your little corporate investigations. You have absolutely no loyalty to your own flesh and blood. You are a cold, ungrateful daughter, and I deeply regret the day I brought you into this world. She stood there, chest heaving, completely unrepentant, finally exposing the incredibly dark and twisted reality of her true character. I did not flinch. I did not cry over my mother's devastating words. I just looked at her calmly and slowly raised my left arm. I tapped the bright digital screen of my smartwatch. The small device glowed brightly in the dark night air, and I pressed the red stop button on the active recording application. Thank you for clarifying that for the official record. Brenda, I said, my voice completely steady and cold. I just captured a crystal clear, high-definition audio recording of you fully confessing to a massive felony theft and the malicious framing of an innocent woman. The audio file has already been automatically backed up to my secure cloud server. Beatrice smiled from the porch, her cane resting lightly against the wooden railing. That is going to sound absolutely beautiful playing in front of a federal judge, Beatrice noted, her voice dripping with icy satisfaction. Richard stared at my illuminated smartwatch for a heavy moment before throwing his head back and letting out a loud, booming laugh. It was a hollow, arrogant sound that echoed harshly against the walls of the dark porch. You two really think you have accomplished something monumental here, he mocked, shaking his head in absolute disbelief. Are you completely deaf or just incredibly stupid, Amber? Did you not just hear Cameron explain the actual law to you 5 minutes ago in your office? He took a confident step forward, his chest puffed out with renewed arrogance as he stood next to my mother. You can record Brenda confessing to that old story until you are completely blue in the face, but it does not change the fundamental reality of the federal justice system. The statute of limitations on that trust fund theft expired decades before you were even born. You could march down to the police station right now and play that little audio file for the local authorities, and they would physically throw you out of the building for wasting their time. The law simply cannot touch us for what happened in 1989. That money is long gone, and the legal case is permanently closed forever. He crossed his thick arms over his chest, looking incredibly pleased with himself. You really thought a cheap parlor trick with a smartwatch was going to send us to federal prison tonight? You are a terrible forensic investigator, Amber. You completely wasted your time trying to dig up a dead legal case just to throw a pathetic tantrum in front of a wealthy daughter-in-law who already left. You have absolutely nothing on us. He smiled down at me, a smug, victorious grin spreading across his red, sweaty face. I let his arrogant laughter die down completely before I finally responded. You are absolutely correct, Richard, I said, keeping my voice perfectly level. The law definitely cannot touch Brenda for what happened 35 years ago. I slowly lowered my wrist and reached into the inside pocket of my cardigan. But unfortunately for both of you, I am not interested in what happened in 1989. Let us talk about what happened exactly 48 hours ago instead. I pulled out a brand new document that had been carefully folded in my pocket. This was not a piece of brittle yellowed paper from the Federal Archives. It was a crisp white sheet of fresh printer paper covered in sharp black text. I unfolded it slowly and held it up under the bright porch light so both of my parents could clearly see the official banking logo printed at the very top. While you were driving here tonight demanding I take out a mortgage on my house to save your precious golden boy, Brenda was actively making her own desperate backup plans. You knew Jasmine was getting highly suspicious of Cameron. You knew his fake tech startup was crashing down, and his casino bookies were demanding immediate cash. So Brenda logged onto a secure banking portal on Tuesday night. I pointed to the bold black numbers printed on the fresh document. This is a digitally signed application for an unsecured signature loan in the exact amount of $800,000. You submitted it online from the IP address of your home computer exactly 2 days ago. I watched my father's smug smile instantly vanish. He turned his head and looked at his wife in complete confusion. Brenda had kept this massive financial gamble a complete secret from him. The document clearly showed the digital signature time-stamped and verified by the National Banking Institution. I read the details aloud just to watch the absolute terror wash over my mother's pale face. An $800,000 personal line of credit requesting an immediate wire transfer to cover emergency corporate expenses. You bypassed the standard branch approval process by submitting it directly through the automated high net worth portal. You were incredibly desperate, Brenda. You needed that cash before Jasmine discovered the truth about the mistresses and the massive gambling debts. You thought you could magically fix your son's ruined life with another massive injection of stolen money. But there is just one massive glaring problem with this online application. I continued taking a slow step toward my mother. I looked directly into her terrified eyes, watching her chest heave with panic. You and I both know the absolute truth about your current financial situation, Brenda. Richard lost almost all of your legitimate liquid assets in those terrible commercial real estate investments 5 years ago. You had to quietly remortgage your expensive suburban house just to keep up appearances at the elite country club. Your personal credit score was completely destroyed in the process. You are currently carrying hundreds of thousands of dollars in hidden credit card debt that Cameron does not even know about. There is absolutely no banking institution on this entire planet that would ever approve an unemployed woman with ruined credit for an $800,000 unsecured signature loan. I watched her swallow hard, her hands trembling wildly as she realized exactly where this conversation was heading. Richard stared at her, demanding to know what she had done, but she was completely paralyzed. So I have to ask you a very simple question, Brenda. I said, my voice dropping to a harsh, unforgiving whisper that cut right through the quiet night. Since your own financial profile is completely worthless and your credit history was entirely destroyed, whose pristine social security number did you use to successfully secure that massive commercial loan online yesterday? The silence that followed was incredibly heavy and suffocating. Brenda opened her mouth to speak, but her throat was completely dry. She knew I already had the answer. She knew she had walked completely blindfolded into a massive legal trap that she could never possibly escape. The truth was about to rip her entire world apart. My mother looked like she was going to physically vomit right there on my front steps. All the aggressive venom and malicious pride she had displayed just moments ago vanished, leaving behind nothing but the raw, terrifying realization of her own catastrophic mistake. Her skin turned an incredibly sickly shade of pale gray, and her knees visibly trembled as she leaned heavily against the wooden porch railing just to keep herself standing upright. Richard stared at her with wide, terrified eyes, finally understanding the massive legal disaster she had secretly dragged them both into. Brenda, tell me you did not do what I think you did, Richard demanded, his voice cracking with absolute panic. Tell me you did not commit federal fraud. Brenda did not even look at him. Her terrified eyes were completely locked on Beatrice, who was still standing calmly on my porch, resting her weight gracefully on her polished wooden cane. I thought you were dead, Brenda whispered, her voice shaking so violently it was barely audible over the cold night breeze. I swear I thought you died in that federal prison decades ago. Nobody ever heard from you again. Your social security number was just sitting there on the old estate documents, completely inactive for 35 years. I only needed to borrow your identity for a few days to get the commercial loan approved. I was going to pay it back before anyone ever noticed the digital signature. I did not think it would matter if I used the profile of a dead woman to save my son. The absolute audacity of her confession was truly staggering. She was standing face to face with the sister she had maliciously framed and sent to a maximum security prison, and her only excuse was that she assumed her victim was already dead. She had completely bypassed the standard banking security checks by leveraging the flawless, pristine credit history of a woman she had violently erased from existence. Beatrice did not show a single ounce of sympathy or forgiveness. She just offered my mother a slow, devastating smile. I did not die in prison, Roxanne. Beatrice replied, her voice perfectly calm and steady. I survived, and I spent the last 30 years quietly building a massive commercial real estate empire. My credit profile is completely flawless, which is exactly why your desperate fraudulent loan application was instantly approved by the automated banking system. I took a confident step forward, holding the printed loan application up so the porch light illuminated the digital banking seal. And that instant approval was not a lucky coincidence, Brenda, I explained, making sure she understood every single detail of her own destruction. Beatrice found me 6 months ago. She walked right into my corporate accounting firm and placed a massive file on my desk. It contained every single piece of evidence proving exactly what you did to her in 1989. She told me the true history of my own family, and she hired me as her lead forensic accountant to track down every last penny you had stolen. But tracking the old stolen money was not enough. I knew the federal statute of limitations protected you from your past crimes. If we wanted true justice, we needed you to commit a brand new felony right in front of us. So I intentionally set a highly sophisticated digital trap. I knew Cameron was bleeding your bank accounts dry to pay for his mistresses and his massive gambling debts in Vegas. I knew Jasmine's wealthy family was getting suspicious, and you were getting incredibly desperate for emergency cash. So I used my professional banking access to intentionally leave a digital loophole wide open. I manipulated the high net worth lending portal to ensure Beatrice's dormant social security number appeared completely inactive, but highly viable for an emergency commercial loan. I laid the bait perfectly, and I waited for your greedy, toxic nature to do the rest. I knew you would never ask Jasmine for the money directly because she would demand an audit of Cameron's failing tech startup. I knew you would take the fastest, most illegal route possible to protect your golden boy. You logged onto your computer in the middle of the night, you typed in Beatrice's social security number, and you committed a massive federal crime completely of your own free will. Nobody forced you to forge that digital signature. Your own toxic greed led you right into the cage I built for you. Richard looked absolutely horrified, backing away from his wife as if she was suddenly radioactive. He finally understood that I had completely outsmarted them, playing them like desperate pawns on a massive financial chessboard. You are not dealing with a 35-year-old cold case anymore, Brenda, I stated, my voice echoing with total, absolute finality. By submitting that fraudulent commercial loan application online, you transmitted fabricated financial data across state lines. That constitutes federal wire fraud under United States law. By using Beatrice's pristine social security number without her explicit legal consent, you committed aggravated federal identity theft. These are not minor suburban misunderstandings or simple civil disputes that you can easily sweep under the expensive rug. These are severe federal felonies investigated directly by the Cybercrimes Division of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. I lowered the printed document and looked my mother right in her terrified eyes, watching her grasp for a lifeline that simply did not exist. The absolute minimum mandatory sentencing for aggravated federal identity theft, combined with massive wire fraud, is 10 years in a federal penitentiary. There is no wealthy lawyer on this planet who can negotiate a plea deal when the digital evidence is completely undeniable and the primary victim is standing right here, ready to testify against you. You are going to lose absolutely everything tonight, and you did it entirely to yourself. Richard let out a primal roar of absolute desperation. The terrifying reality of spending 10 years in a federal prison completely shattered whatever fragile rational thought he still possessed. He lunged forward with astonishing speed for a man his size, completely bypassing my mother and snatching the printed loan application right out of my hand. He aggressively ripped the crisp white paper into tiny shreds, throwing the pieces into the cold night wind as if destroying a single physical printout would magically erase a massive digital footprint. "You are not sending my wife to prison," he screamed, his face contorted in a wild, unhinged panic. He shoved his way forcefully past me on the porch and charged violently back through the open front door into my hallway. He was heading straight for my home office, fully intending to smash my computer monitor and physically destroy the hard drives he believed held the damning evidence. He genuinely thought he could beat a federal wire fraud charge with brute physical force and property damage. But he did not even make it halfway down the corridor. The two massive security guards Beatrice had hired were already stationed perfectly in the hallway, blocking his path. Richard lowered his shoulder and tried to violently barrel through them like a desperate linebacker, but the professional guards did not even flinch. The taller guard simply stepped forward, grabbed Richard by the lapels of his expensive tailored suit, and effortlessly spun him around. In one swift, highly trained motion, the guard swept my father's heavy legs right out from under him. Richard hit the polished hardwood floor with a massive, sickening thud that knocked the wind completely out of his lungs. The second guard immediately dropped down and pinned Richard's thick arms forcefully behind his back, driving a heavy knee straight into his spine to keep him entirely immobilized. My father thrashed wildly against the floorboard, spitting and cursing, demanding they let him go, but he was completely trapped. Beatrice walked slowly through the front door, tapping her polished wooden cane against the hardwood, looking down at him with an expression of absolute disgust. "You always were a pathetic, impulsive brute, Richard," she noted, her voice echoing in the tense hallway. "Did you honestly believe a professional forensic accountant would leave the only copy of federal evidence sitting on a vulnerable local hard drive?" Before Richard could gasp out another pathetic physical threat, the entire atmosphere of the dark suburban street completely shifted. A sudden, intense burst of flashing red and blue lights illuminated the large front windows of my house, casting long, sharp shadows that danced wildly across the hallway walls. The harsh mechanical screech of heavy vehicle tires braking aggressively on the asphalt echoed loudly through the quiet neighborhood. This was not a single local police cruiser casually responding to a late-night noise complaint. Through the open front door, I watched three massive black sport utility vehicles completely block my crushed stone driveway, cutting off any possible escape route. Several imposing figures, dressed in dark, heavy tactical windbreakers, stepped out of the vehicles, slamming their heavy doors in perfect unison. Large, bright yellow letters were printed boldly across the backs of their jackets, clearly identifying them as special agents of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Brenda turned her head slowly toward the street, her eyes widening in absolute, unimaginable horror as the harsh, flashing lights washed over her pale, terrified face. "You called them?" Brenda whispered, her voice completely devoid of any life or hope. "You actually called the police on your own mother." I stepped back inside my house and looked at her coldly. "I did not call anyone, Brenda," I replied, keeping my perfectly steady and clinical tone. "When I configured the digital trap on the HiNet Worth lending portal, I set an automated alert directly linked to the Federal Cybercrimes Division. The exact second you submitted that fraudulent digital signature, you essentially dispatched the federal agents to this exact address yourself. I am just the auditor who built the tripwire. You are the one who actively decided to cross it." The heavy synchronized footsteps of the federal agents marching up my gravel driveway completely broke my mother. The arrogant, wealthy socialite facade she had worn like impenetrable armor for my entire life instantly evaporated into thin air. She let out a loud, agonizing wail that sounded exactly like a wounded animal, and her knees gave out completely. She collapsed onto the hardwood floor of the entryway, crawling frantically toward me. She threw her arms violently around my lower legs, gripping my sweatpants with a desperate, crushing strength. "Amber, please," she sobbed hysterically, burying her tear-stained face against my knees. "Please do not let them take me away. I am your mother. I gave you life. You cannot do this to your own flesh and blood. Tell them it was a massive mistake. Tell them I had your explicit permission to use the Social Security number. I will do absolutely anything you want. I will transfer the deed to my house to you tomorrow morning. I will cut Cameron completely out of my will and give you absolutely everything I own. I will be the perfect mother you always wanted. Just please tell the agents to go away." Her thick, expensive makeup ran down her face in dark, ugly streaks, mixing with her endless, desperate tears. She was hyperventilating wildly, clinging to me like a terrified, drowning victim, begging the daughter she had emotionally abused for 3 decades to suddenly become her ultimate savior. I looked down at the pathetic, weeping woman clutching my legs and felt absolutely nothing at all. No pity, no sadness, no lingering childhood guilt. I reached down, grabbed her wrists, and forcefully pried her desperate, trembling hands off my body. You do not have anything left to offer me, Brenda, I said, taking a firm step backward to distance myself from her toxic grasp. You cannot buy your way out of federal consequences, and I am absolutely done paying for your sins. The heavy footfalls of the federal agents reached my front porch before Brenda could formulate another desperate bargaining chip. The lead agent, a tall, broad-shouldered man with a stern expression and closely cropped gray hair, stepped straight through the open doorway without a single moment of hesitation. He held a thick stack of official paperwork tightly in his left hand, the federal search and arrest warrants prominently displayed. He did not bother asking for permission to enter my home. The sheer authority radiating from his presence instantly silenced my mother's pathetic sobbing. 3 other heavily armed agents quickly filed into the brightly lit hallway behind him, their eyes sweeping the space to immediately secure the perimeter. They spotted Richard first, still pinned firmly to the hardwood floor by Beatrice's private security team. The lead agent gave a sharp nod and the security guards seamlessly stepped back, transferring the physical custody of my struggling father over to the federal authorities. 2 agents hauled Richard up by the collar of his ruined, expensive suit, completely ignoring his dramatic groans of discomfort. The lead agent then turned his cold, calculating gaze down to the floor, where my mother was still kneeling by my legs, her expensive makeup completely ruined by her endless tears. Brenda Hayes and Richard Hayes, the lead agent stated, his deep voice booming with absolute legal authority. You are both currently the primary subjects of an active federal cybercrimes investigation. We have secured a judge-approved warrant for your immediate arrest on multiple counts of aggravated identity theft and interstate wire fraud. The reality of the situation finally crashed down on them with the crushing weight of a collapsing building. There was no more room for suburban negotiation and absolutely no wealthy country club friends left to call for a convenient last-minute rescue. The second the word arrest left the agent's mouth, Richard completely snapped. The last remaining shred of his arrogant, patriarchal pride dissolved into pure, unadulterated cowardice. He violently yanked his shoulders, trying to pull away from the agents gripping his arms. "Wait, just a minute!" Richard screamed, his voice cracking with sheer terror as he pointed a shaking finger directly at his wife. "I did not do anything wrong. I am completely innocent in all of this. You need to arrest her. She is the one who stole the identity." Brenda acted entirely alone. I had absolutely no idea she was logging onto that banking portal, and I never gave her permission to forge any digital signatures. She handles all the household finances. I am just a victim of her insane manipulation. My mother gasped loudly, her eyes wide with absolute horror, as the man she had spent decades protecting instantly threw her straight under the federal bus to save his own skin. All the desperate tears dried up in an instant, replaced by a vicious, toxic rage. "You lying, cowardly bastard!" Brenda shrieked, scrambling awkwardly to her feet. "How dare you stand there and pretend you did not know exactly what I was doing? You were the one who told me to find the money by any means necessary. You were the one who sat in the home office drinking expensive scotch while I dug up Beatrice's old social security number. You told me it was a brilliant plan to save Cameron's business before Jasmine discovered the truth." She lunged toward Richard, her manicured hands curled into aggressive claws, but the federal agents quickly intercepted her. Richard shook his head, frantically sweating profusely under the bright hallway lights. "Do not listen to her," he pleaded desperately with the stoic federal agents. "She is a pathological liar. She lied about her name for 35 years. She framed her own sister for a felony. She is a criminal hiding in plain sight, and she is trying to drag an innocent businessman down with her." Brenda let out a deafening scream of pure malicious fury. "Innocent," she spat, laughing hysterically. "I have the secret offshore bank account numbers, Richard. I know exactly where you hid the remaining trust fund money. If I am going to a federal prison, I am making absolutely sure you are sitting in the cell right next to me." They viciously tore each other apart right there in my front hallway. The federal agents did not care about their pathetic domestic dispute. They were highly trained professionals who dealt with wealthy, white-collar criminals, completely turning on each other every single day. The lead agent raised a heavy hand, instantly silencing their vicious screaming match. "That is enough," he commanded sharply, his voice echoing with absolute finality. You can both explain your respective involvement to the federal judge during your arraignment hearing tomorrow morning. He gestured to the two agents holding my parents. The harsh metallic clicking of heavy steel handcuffs ratcheting tightly around my father's wrists sounded incredibly loud in the sudden silence of the house. Richard let out a pathetic whimper, completely defeated, as his hands were locked securely behind his back. Brenda did not fight the cuffs. She simply stared blankly at the hardwood floor, her entire world completely shattered, as the cold metal clamped tightly around her own wrists. "You have the right to remain silent." The lead agent began reciting the famous Miranda warning with a practiced clinical detachment. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be provided for you." As the agent finished reading their rights, Beatrice stepped out of the shadows of my home office and walked slowly down the hallway. She paused right in front of her handcuffed sister, leaning heavily on her polished wooden cane. She did not gloat or scream. She simply looked Brenda up and down, taking in the ruined designer clothes and the devastating reality of her impending prison sentence. "You should have stayed an orphan," Roxanne Beatrice whispered coldly. "It would have saved us all a lot of trouble." The federal agents firmly grabbed my parents by their upper arms and began marching them toward the open front door. The federal agents firmly guided my handcuffed parents out of the brightly lit hallway and onto the cold concrete of my front porch. The flashing red and blue lights from the three massive sport utility vehicles had completely shattered the quiet tranquility of my suburban street. I stepped out onto the porch right behind them, watching the devastating public spectacle unfold. The commotion had woken up practically the entire neighborhood. Dozens of my neighbors were standing out on their perfectly manicured lawns wearing heavy winter robes and thick pajamas. They were whispering quietly among themselves, their eyes wide with absolute shock as they watched the incredibly arrogant wealthy couple being physically escorted down my crushed stone driveway. Richard kept his head aggressively bowed, trying desperately to hide his red, sweating face from the countless judging eyes staring at him. He stumbled awkwardly over the loose gravel, his expensive leather shoes scraping harshly against the stones, but the federal agents did not slow down to accommodate his clumsiness. Brenda, on the other hand, could not hide at all. Her knees were completely weak, and the two agents practically had to carry her limp body toward the waiting vehicles. The harsh, bright lights of the police cruisers illuminated every single detail of her ruined designer clothing and the dark tear streaks running down her pale, terrified face. This was the exact public humiliation she had spent her entire fraudulent life trying to avoid. She had stolen millions of dollars and framed her own sister just to maintain an illusion of absolute superiority and prestige. Now she was being paraded like a common criminal in front of an entire street of silent witnesses. The lead agent opened the heavy rear door of the closest black vehicle. He firmly placed his hand on the top of my father's head, guiding him safely into the cramped back seat before slamming the door shut with a loud metallic thud. Brenda was loaded into the second vehicle, her pathetic sobbing completely muffled, the second the thick bulletproof glass window rolled up. Just like that, the terrifying, authoritative figures who had tormented me for my entire childhood were completely neutralized and locked away inside the back of federal transport cars. Cameron had followed us out onto the porch, his face completely pale and his eyes wide with sheer panic. He watched the heavy vehicle doors slam shut, trapping his parents inside, and suddenly realized he was completely utterly alone. He scrambled down the wooden porch stairs and practically sprinted toward the lead federal agent who was busy signing paperwork on the hood of his cruiser. "Excuse me, officer," Cameron stammered, his voice shaking with absolute desperation. "I am their son. I did not do anything wrong, but my wife left me, and I am completely stranded here. Can you please give me a ride back to my hotel, or at least drop me off at a local taxi stand? I do not have any money on me." The tall federal agent looked up from his clipboard, eyeing my brother with a mixture of professional detachment and absolute disgust. "We are a federal cybercrimes task force, son," the agent replied coldly. "We are not a complimentary shuttle service for stranded civilians. Step away from the federal vehicle immediately." Cameron backed away, terrified by the harsh command. He stood frozen in the middle of my driveway as the three heavy black vehicles simultaneously shifted into gear. The engines roared to life, and the convoy slowly rolled out of my driveway, disappearing down the dark suburban street and taking his entire fraudulent support system with them. Cameron turned around and looked up at me standing alone on the porch. "Amber, please," he begged, taking a hesitant step toward the stairs. Jasmine took my wallet in her designer bag. "My car keys are locked inside my parents' luxury vehicle. Every single joint bank account I have is going to be frozen by Jasmine's corporate lawyers by morning. I have absolutely nowhere else to go. Let me just sleep on your couch tonight." I looked down at the golden child. The boy who had been handed absolutely everything his entire life while I was treated like a ghost. I stepped forward and grabbed the brass handle of my front door. "You are trespassing on my property, Cameron," I said, my voice completely devoid of any sibling affection. "If you are not completely off my driveway in exactly 10 seconds, I am calling the local police and having you arrested for loitering. Start walking." Cameron stared at me, his mouth opening and closing in absolute disbelief, but he quickly realized I was completely serious. The massive financial safety net he had relied on his entire life was permanently gone. He slowly turned his back and began walking heavily down the long driveway. I watched him trudge down the dark sidewalk, his expensive tailored suit offering absolutely no protection against the cold night wind. He was completely penniless, completely alone, and finally forced to face the harsh reality of the real world he had desperately avoided for 29 years. I stepped backward into the warm hallway of my home and pulled the heavy oak door shut. The solid click of the deadbolt locking into place sounded incredibly peaceful. I turned around and looked at Beatrice, who was still standing quietly near the home office. The chaotic screaming and the flashing police lights were completely gone, leaving behind a profound, heavy silence. I let out a long, deep breath, feeling the crushing weight of 3 decades of emotional abuse completely lift off my shoulders. We were finally alone in the quiet house, completely safe and entirely free. 6 months passed incredibly quickly after that chaotic night on my driveway. The feeling of being completely safe and entirely free only grew stronger with each passing day. The federal case against my parents did not drag out into some highly publicized, dramatic, televised trial. The digital evidence I provided to the investigators was far too comprehensive for any defense attorney to successfully fight in a courtroom. Once the Cybercrimes Division officially audited their entire financial history, discovering the massive hidden credit card debt and verifying the exact computer addresses used for the fraudulent loan application, my parents' legal team practically begged the prosecutors for a plea deal. Richard and Brenda formally pleaded guilty to aggravated identity theft and interstate wire fraud, just to avoid the maximum sentencing guidelines. Standing in the back of the federal courtroom during their final sentencing hearing, I did not feel a single ounce of pity. Brenda looked completely unrecognizable without her expensive cosmetic treatments and tailored designer wardrobe. She wore a standard-issue khaki jumpsuit, her gray roots fully exposed, looking every bit like the convicted felon she had always been hiding beneath her wealthy surface. Richard had lost a significant amount of weight, his arrogant posture completely broken by the harsh reality of a concrete cell. The federal judge showed absolutely zero leniency, citing their total lack of remorse and the highly malicious nature of stealing a sibling's identity for personal financial gain. They were both sentenced to serve 8 full years in a federal penitentiary with no possibility of early parole. All of their remaining assets, including the sprawling suburban colonial house they had proudly flaunted for decades, were officially seized by the government to pay off their massive hidden debts and provide full restitution. Their prestigious country club friends immediately pretended they had never even met them, erasing my parents from their wealthy social circles overnight. As for my brother, the golden child experienced his own spectacular fall from grace. Without our parents' stolen money to prop up his fake tech company and fund his gambling addiction, Cameron was forced to face the brutal reality of actual adulthood. Jasmine was absolutely relentless, just like she promised. She hired a team of the most aggressive corporate divorce attorneys in the state, and they completely obliterated him in civil court. They froze every single bank account, seized the luxury vehicles he bought for his mistresses, and legally held him responsible for every penny he embezzled from her personal trust fund. Because Cameron had zero actual marketable skills and a massive public fraud scandal attached to his name, no respectable corporate firm would even consider hiring him. 2 weeks ago, I was driving across town and stopped at a local drive-thru to grab a quick coffee. When I pulled up to the payment window, the sliding glass door opened, and there stood the former tech chief executive officer. Cameron was wearing a ridiculous bright yellow fast food uniform, complete with a matching visor, a grease-stained apron, and a plastic name tag tightly pinned to his chest. He looked completely exhausted, his hands moving slowly as he counted out the loose change for my order. He recognized my car immediately, and his face flushed a deep, humiliating shade of red. He did not say a single word to me, and I did not say a word to him. I just took my receipt and drove away. I later found out that Jasmine's legal team successfully petitioned the court to aggressively garnish his minimum wage paychecks. Every single week, 70% of his meager earnings is automatically deducted to slowly pay back the hundreds of thousands of dollars he stole from his ex-wife. I sat on my front porch this morning, wrapping my hands warmly around a fresh mug of dark roast coffee. The crisp morning air felt incredibly clean and peaceful. Beatrice sat in the wicker chair right next to me, resting her polished wooden cane against the railing as she gracefully sipped her own tea. Over the past 6 months, she and I had built an incredibly strong bond. It was not built on the toxic obligations of blood or the desperate emotional manipulation that my parents had always utilized to control me. It was built on mutual respect, absolute honesty, and a shared understanding of what it actually takes to survive a deeply broken family. We do not agree on absolutely everything, but we listen to each other. And that is a luxury I never experienced while growing up in that awful colonial house. Looking out at my quiet, crushed stone driveway, where those massive federal vehicles had parked 6 months ago, I finally understood the true meaning of independence. For years, I thought I had escaped my toxic family simply by moving out, getting a successful career, and making my own money. But true freedom is not just about financial independence. True freedom is the absolute refusal to let toxic people define your self-worth, even if those people are the ones who brought you into this world. So many of us are taught that family is an unbreakable bond, that we must constantly forgive. Severe abuse, financial manipulation, and blatant disrespect simply because we share the same genetic code. But that is a dangerous lie, designed by abusers to keep you trapped in a cycle of endless guilt. You do not owe your peace of mind to people who actively choose to destroy it. You are absolutely allowed to set firm boundaries. You are allowed to walk away from tables where respect is no longer being served. Most importantly, you are allowed to build your own chosen family from people who genuinely value your presence and actively protect your peace. Have you ever had to walk away from toxic relatives to protect your own mental and financial well-being? How did you finally find the strength to cut those heavy ties? I would love to read your stories in the comments below. If this journey resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to my channel. Share this story with anyone who might need a reminder that walking away from a toxic family is not a sign of weakness, but the ultimate act of self-preservation. Thank you for listening, and remember, your life truly begins the exact moment you decide you are worth fighting for.